When I was 23 years old, I was focused on my future, and I was trying to create a new identity for myself. I knew I wanted to be in the medical field, but I also knew I might want to be a mom, and I really wanted to live a full life. And from what I could tell, being a doctor meant you didn't really have a life. So I decided to become a certified nursing assistant and take an EMT course, which then turned into me getting accepted at Oregon Health Sciences University to their paramedic program. At the same time, I was actually working at OHSU as a CNA. So I felt like my life was on track, except for my love life. I had decided that I was going to take a break from dating because being a serial monogamist is exhausting. I wore my heart on my sleeve, and I was really wrapped up in needing to be loved and praised all the time, which I didn't realize was an issue at the time. And there's another sentence that comes after that. Breathing. I also knew that I wanted to create something different in my life, which meant that I had to control everything around me, because I'm that way, to try to keep the chaos out of my life. Not that I realized I was trying to do that either at the time. But what I did know that it was that my heart had been broken so many times, and I did want a partner, but I was afraid of the pain. And life was lonely, but my goals are really more important. So one day when I was at work, I was getting the report for the next round of patients that I'd be taking care of. And I found out that we had a floor favorite, which is kind of like a frequent flyer in the hospital world. And his name was Brandon, and he had cystic fibrosis. Now, I didn't know what CF, or cystic fibrosis, was, but I quickly learned that's a genetic illness that has no cure, and it wreaks havoc on the lungs of its victims. So I was really surprised when I walked into his room after hearing that to see this guy sitting there. And the first thought in my head was, how is he sick? How is he a floor favorite? He doesn't look sick at all. He had this huge smile plastered on his face. He was just sitting on his bed, messy hair. He did have oxygen going into his nose with a nasal cannula. Just pajamas on, watching the show Cops, like blaring. This is in the hospital, on the TV. And his mom was just sitting next to him in a chair grading papers. So I took his vitals and I gave him his tray, and we had a little conversation. But when I left that room, I thought, I need to find out more about this guy named Brandon. Now, as a CNA, one of my jobs is to make sure when the call lights go off above their doors, then I need to go figure out what it is they need. Shortly after I left the room, his call light goes on, and I pick up the phone at the nurse's station, ask him what he needs, and he just wanted some more cranberry juice. No problem. Got him the juice, took it to his room, went about my day. 2 minutes later, the light goes off again. So I pick up the phone. And this time, he wanted some Jell-O, strawberry to be exact. So I had to go find some strawberry Jell-O and deliver it to a room. And I noticed that they had some very interesting looking smiles on their faces when I was there at that time. So I left. 5 minutes later, again with the light. I'm starting to get suspicious. This time, he wants some coffee. Okay, would you like cream and sugar? And he said, sure, I'll take some cream. But for the sugar, you can just bring your sweetness to my door. You can imagine it was a little awkward delivering the coffee. So despite my plan to avoid a relationship, we started dating. Whatever. So much for that plan. Because the universe has a really funny way of putting experiences in your life. But we do have a choice. We have a choice to pass on that experience and stay on the safe deck, or we can choose to dive into the deep end. I'm sure you can guess probably where that was going. So I chose, despite the warnings from other people, probably not a good idea to date someone with a, non-curable illness. But all I saw out of Brandon was his desire to live. He was full of life all the time, smiling all the time. He was a floor favorite, for goodness sakes. Of course. So I decided to get to know him. And what I really thought was interesting is that he had this passion for life and this perspective about life that actually challenged my entire belief system of what living was all about. So I was hooked. Our first date was a movie. Now, he is required to wear oxygen all the time. So he had his backpack and he had his oxygen tank, but he didn't want to wear the nasal cannula. And I asked about it, and he's like, oh, I don't have to wear it all the time. Like, I knew better. So I just kind of watched his coloring. Because that's romantic and all. And when the movie was over, he was a little pale. So we get back in his car, and I'm like, Brandon, you can put on your cannula. It's okay. I don't mind. And he looked at me, and he looked kind of embarrassed, like it's a secret or something. Well, I just wanted to be normal for you. Right? I know. My heart I just hurt so bad when he said that. And I looked at him and I said, you realize that I like you for you. I don't care about the cannula. I don't care about the disease. And he was super confident, really. But he was just a boy trying to impress a girl. Now, despite his oxygen requirement, he was amazing. He was a reserve police officer for the Amity Police Department. He worked a job at a grocery store. He did martial arts, and he really loved to hike. So truly, he was a hero. Nothing stopped him except for his body. Most people with cystic fibrosis are diagnosed at birth, but he wasn't. Back then, it wasn't a mandatory test. He had a lot of digestive issues as a toddler, and they diagnosed him with celiac disease. That really explained his rice cake addiction to me. Most people when he was finally diagnosed when he was 19, that is this is a very late diagnosis for this disease. When he found out the test results, he asked the doctor, does that mean I don't have celiac anymore? But more importantly, does that mean I can eat anything I want? So he was thrilled that he had cystic fibrosis because not only could he eat anything he wanted, he needed to eat more of it because they don't keep weight on very well. Yeah, those are the kind of cool things that he did. But because he was diagnosed late in life, 19, isn't that sad? Though he was diagnosed late, he started to feel the effects of that very quickly. And lung infections and thick, sticky mucus were really his greatest threats. So in order to make it a little bit more entertaining, he decided when he was in the hospital, he would have these contests with other CFers, is what we called them for short, that were like not roommates, but down the hall. There's usually a few of them at a time present in the hospital. And so here was the contest. Who can cough up the most mucus during the respiratory therapy session? It is as disgusting as it sounds. And he would cough up this mucus into this bucket, and when you turn the bucket upside down, nothing comes out. That's how thick it was. Can you imagine having that in your lungs? Yeah, it was pretty gross. But these are the types of things he would do to make having this disease bearable and enjoyable, if you could do that. Because that's the kind of person he was. He wasn't going to let this rule his life. To him, cystic fibrosis was not a death sentence. It was just part of his life. He was very good at choosing how he wanted to live, how he wanted to feel, and how he wanted to think about his condition. Amazing. When I found out the severity of his condition 2 months later, I was floored. He refused to talk about it, and he refused to let his medical team, fondly called gloom and doom, taint him with any of their negativity or fear. In fact, he called them into his room one day to have a private conference, and he told them he was going to fire all of them if they didn't lighten up. Who does that? Who does that? He does that. Yes. So, yeah. He was amazing. And when you have that kind of love for life and you don't care what anybody else thinks, that is why I fell in love with him. So much of that it's just amazing. And he taught me a lot about that. Now, his goal was to have a transplant. He needed new lungs. He was on the transplant list at Oregon Health Sciences University. However, it was taking a long time. So we pushed really hard to get transferred to Seattle so he could be double listed. And if he was in Seattle, he'd be at the top of their list. But going to Seattle meant his heart had to be strong too, because they don't do lung heart transplants, which is actually a common thing for CF patients. Gloom and doom, medical team. We're very concerned that he wouldn't survive the medical transport from Portland to Seattle. But Brandon wouldn't have any of that. He didn't care. It's like, I will survive it. I am going to live. And so we got approved, and we made it to Seattle. Once in Seattle, new tests started. I was by his side every step of the way. I was there to watch every move, to watch every test, and to ask all the pertinent and apparently very annoying questions to those doctors, because I was a paramedic, so I knew everything. No, I knew a lot, but not everything. And the one test, though, that stood out that really showed me the strength of this person was a chest x-ray. The tech pulled the chest x-ray up for us to look at, both of his lungs, almost completely white, except for this much. And this part was black. And I had to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. I said, that's it, right? And he's like, yes, that's it. Brandon was living on this much lung capacity. That is all. And I was so shocked that I said out loud, how are you even alive? That was supposed to stay in my head. Came out my mouth. But in Brandon fashion, he quickly came right back and said, my sexiness is what keeps me going. I could do a whole talk on just those types of things, he said. Later that day, he wanted to go outside. He loved being outside, so we got him in his wheelchair, and we went out, just me and him went outside, and we were sitting in the sun. It was a spring day, and he was really quiet. And you could probably guess from what I've been saying, he was not a quiet person, generally, just all the time. And he had a really serious look on his face, which made me really nervous. It wasn't like him. That night was really rough. He was tossing and turning, hot and agitated. It took him forever to fall asleep. Our friend Joy, who was Brandon's favorite nurse from OHSU, actually came up with us to Seattle. So she was there too. And we finally got him to a place where he could sleep, and we fell asleep, but only to be awakened a few hours later by the nurse, who was frantic because Brandon wouldn't wake up. Brandon had fallen into a carbon dioxide coma. When you are trying to exhale, you inhale and then you exhale. If you have lung disease, you trap the carbon dioxide you're supposed to exhale. So it builds in your system, and it can cause you to be disoriented, kind of feel drunk, sometimes euphoric. But if it's so high, it can actually put you in a coma. So Brandon was then rushed to the ICU. More tests were started. They put a positive pressure mask on his face to try to force air in so he could clear the carbon dioxide. And they wanted to intubate him. But if you intubate someone, they become ventilator dependent, and that kills your list choice chances. No transplant. So we said no. And then that's not funny. I bumped my chin, so just to be clear. So we just had to kind of see what was going to happen. We had to sit and wait. 2 hours later, the doctor came in and told him and his mom we needed to go into the family conference room. I knew what that meant. And in that conference, he told us that we needed to be ready because this was going to be the end. We were devastated. We had fought so hard to be where we were. How could this possibly be happening? So we had to go back to the room and wait. And Joy and Diana and I sat around, played his favorite music, and we talked about all the amazing things that he did and all the things that he did that were so funny and the way that he touched and inspired everybody he knew. And as the night went on, we got tired. He was still just there sleeping, I guess. And I laid my head on the bed, and I was holding his hand, and I looked up at his face, and I looked at Joy, and I said, this would just be like Brandon to just decide to take a long nap and then pull through. He had been told 3 months prior to that day, 8 different times he was going to die within a day. So in the wee hours of the morning, Brandon sat up. He sat up. I swear to God, my eyes are probably as big as plates. And I was just like, hi? And he sat up and he looked around. Hi. I don't even remember what I said after that, but I know what he said. He said, do you think they have any strawberry jello? Because I'm really hungry. I don't know what happened after that. All I know is there's people around. They're all excited. They went and got the doctor. The doctor walks in. His face was priceless. He could not believe what he was seeing. His jaw was wide open, and he had to regain his composure. And he reached his hand out to introduce himself and told Brandon, I have never seen anything like this before. And Brandon's like, okay. Do you have any strawberry jello? Because I'm really hungry. Goodness. So we got him some strawberry jello, just so you know. Didn't let him go without. So he was a type of person that really kept hope alive. He was very, very strong in the way that his mind worked. And that miracle just heightened that and proved that to us because he was such a fighter. But there were 3 things that were very important to him. The first one was he wanted to make sure whatever happened, he ended up at home. Number 2 was that he had all the people around him that he loved the most. And number 3 was that he wanted to marry me. And we were able to give him 2 of the 3. With his very strong mind, he was able to push forward. And 5 days later, we got married. The next day, he was very restless. He wouldn't lay down. He kept wanting to sit up. And he was still kind of in that carbon dioxide, euphoric, weird state. But when he was lucid, he would grab my hand and put our rings together and look at me with his goofy smile and say, I'm married, and you're my whiff. Because he thought that was really funny, and wife wasn't as funny. So that's what he would say. Over and over. Later in the day, the nurses were very concerned because he was so restless. And they asked him and his mom and I if we were okay with them giving him morphine so that he could relax. Well, morphine is also going to sedate him, which means he can't cough up that thick, sticky mucus out of his lungs. And I know his mom as well, and probably himself, were not ready to surrender to anything like that. So we said no. Me and Joy walked back into Brandon's room after that conversation. And I put my hand on Brandon, and he was flaccid. Joy and I looked at each other with panic in our eyes. And I had to walk out of that room, walk back to his mom with tears running down my cheeks. And I told her, Diana, we have to give him the morphine. It's time. That night, we unplugged the monitors. No more beeping, no more oxygen, just him and us. Salt accumulating on his skin. And the next morning, he took his final breath. And it was a big fuck you to CF because his final breath was a mucus-filled cough. Brandon Godby died on April 4th, 1999, 8 months after we met. It was Easter Sunday, and he was 25 years old. Brandon taught me so many things. His perspective on life was something I'd never seen before. He taught me how to see life differently. He taught me to be true to who I am and believe in myself, despite what anyone says. In fact, he taught everyone he knew that beautiful lesson. Today, I see my challenges as just small obstacles on my path to my purpose. And I struggle, but I know I must trust. I must take those risks. And even when things can be gloom and doom, I have to remain positive. You see, Brandon wasn't just my hero. He taught me how to be a hero for myself. So friends, live. I mean, really live your life. Go after your dreams. Don't listen to the negativity that people put in your way. And when you feel like everything is at a loss, just take a really long nap. And when you wake up, have yourself some strawberry jello.